The sun beat down on the cracked earth of Redemption Creek, turning the horizon into a shimmering mirage where heat dust and a mercilessly blue sky bled into one. It was a place that offered little in the way of second chances, a truth Jessie Mae Shaw felt in her very bones. Inside the Redemption Savings and Loan, the air was still and smelled of stale paper and old money, a scent that only amplified her desperation. She stood before the polished oak desk of Mr. Abernathy, a man whose starched collar seemed to hold his head in a permanent state of disapproval. Her eldest daughter Ella stood beside her, her small hand clutched tightly in Jessie's. At 8 years old, Ella had already learned the hard posture of defiance, her chin lifted, as if to shield her mother from the world's indignities. "Mr. Abernathy, please." Jessie began, her voice quieter than she intended. "It's just a small loan, enough for seed and flour to see us through to the harvest. The land is good, it just needs a chance." Abernathy peered at her over the rim of his spectacles, his expression one of profound boredom. "Mrs. Shaw, we've been over this. The bank does not consider hope a form of collateral. Your late husband left you with considerable debt and a parcel of land that has produced nothing but dust for a year. I cannot in good conscience extend you further credit." Each word was a small, sharp stone thrown at her already bruised pride. She could feel the eyes of the other patrons in the bank, the quiet hum of their judgment. A widow, a loan failing. It was the oldest story in the West. "It won't fail this time." Jessie insisted, a tremor in her voice. "I'll work it day and night." Before Abernathy could deliver his final crushing refusal, the serene quiet of the bank was shattered. The front doors burst open with a violent crack, slamming against the interior walls. 3 men stormed in their faces, obscured by grimy bandanas, shotguns held low and steady. Panic erupted like a flash fire. A woman screamed. A clerk dove behind his counter. "Nobody move," the leader snarled, his voice a gravelly rasp that scraped at the sudden, terrified silence. "This is a robbery. Hands where I can see 'em." Jessie's heart leaped into her throat. Instinctively, she pulled Ella behind her, her body forming a fragile shield. The air grew thick, electric with fear. The robbers moved with practiced efficiency, one covering the door, while the other 2 advanced on the teller's cages. Time seemed to warp, stretching and compressing with every frantic heartbeat. Across the lobby, a man who had been standing quietly by the window turned. He was broad-shouldered, dressed in worn denim and leather, his face weathered by sun and shadowed by the brim of a low-pulled hat. He hadn't shouted or moved to flee. He simply watched, his eyes the color of a storm-tossed sky, missing nothing. His stillness was an anomaly in the chaos, a point of calm in the swirling vortex of terror. The lead robber shoved a canvas sack at a trembling teller. "Fill it, all of it." As the teller fumbled with the cash drawer, a nervous deputy no older than a boy reached unsteadily for the pistol at his hip. It was a fatal miscalculation. The robber by the door saw the movement and fired without hesitation. The shotgun's roar was deafening, a physical blow that shook the entire room. The blast tore a chunk of plaster from the wall, missing the deputy but sending a spray of debris and a stray pellet ricocheting through the air. Jessie saw it all in horrifying slow motion. The glint of lead spinning through a sunbeam, arcing directly toward her daughter. A strangled cry died in her throat. She was frozen, a prisoner of a moment that stretched into an eternity. Ella's wide, terrified eyes were fixed on the deadly projectile. Then the still man moved. He exploded into action, covering the distance between them in 2 powerful strides. There was no time for a warning, no time for words. He dove his body a solid, unhesitating force, tackling both Jessie and Ella to the floor. Jessie felt a jarring impact. As his shoulder connected with hers, the hard wooden floorboards meeting her back as he covered them with his own body. A fraction of a second later, a sharp asterisk, thwack asterisk, echoed just above her head, and the sound of the pellet embedding itself in the wall where Ella's chest had been. The air rushed back into Jessie's lungs in a ragged gasp. She lay pinned beneath the stranger's weight, Ella trembling uncontrollably under her arm. The stranger's breathing was steady, his body a warm, solid barrier against the violence erupting around them. Gunshots now echoed from the street as the sheriff and his men responded. The robbers, their sack half full, decided their time was up. They backed out of the bank, firing one last volley toward the door before disappearing into the clamor outside. Slowly, the stranger pushed himself up, his movements economical and precise. He offered a calloused hand to Jessie. "You all right, ma'am?" he asked, his voice low, and even betraying none of the adrenaline that was surely coursing through him. Jessie could only nod, her words lost to shock. She pulled Ella into a fierce embrace, her hands running over her daughter's arms and back, assuring herself she was unharmed. Ella clung to her, silent tears streaming down her dusty cheeks. When Jessie finally looked up, the stranger was already turning away, melting back into the periphery as if he preferred the shadows. The sheriff, a weary man named Elias Thorne, with a drooping mustache and tired eyes, stomped into the bank, his own gun drawn. The immediate danger was over, but the aftershocks remained. Mr. Abernathy, now emerging from under his desk, dusted himself off and immediately resumed his posture of authority. He glanced at Jessie, his expression hardening. "As you can see, Mrs. Shaw, this is no place for a child. I believe our business is concluded." He dismissed her with a wave of his hand, his callousness a fresh wound in the raw aftermath of the attack. Humiliation warred with a tidal wave of gratitude for the man who had saved her child. She searched the room for him, but he was gone. He had saved her daughter's life and vanished without a word, a ghost of a man who appeared only when needed. Jessie gathered Ella and her two younger children, Sammy and Molly, who had been waiting on the bench outside, and stepped back out into the oppressive heat of Redemption Creek. The town was buzzing with the news of the robbery, but for Jessie, the world had narrowed to a single terrifying truth: she was utterly, terrifyingly alone, and her children were vulnerable. The bank had been her last hope. Now that door was closed, and the desert stretched before her, vast and unforgiving. That evening, as a bruised twilight settled over the plains, a shadow fell across her doorway. Jessie looked up from the meager pot of beans simmering over the fire to see the stranger from the bank standing on her porch. In his hands, he held a hefty sack of flour and a parcel wrapped in butcher paper. He simply placed them on the porch step. "Figured you could use this," he said, his gaze direct and unwavering. Jessie stared at the provisions, then at him. I can't pay you for this." "It ain't a loan," he replied. He tipped his hat slightly. "Name's Alex Boone. Jessie May Shaw," she whispered, her heart aching. "You saved my daughter's life today." "Thank you isn't a big enough word. No thanks needed." His eyes drifted to Ella, who peeked from behind her mother's skirt. He gave a small, almost imperceptible nod. "Just saw a thing that needed doing." Before she could say more, he turned and walked away, his broad shoulders silhouetted against the dying light. He moved like a man who carried the weight of the world, but had learned to walk with it so it wouldn't crush him. As he disappeared into the dusk, Jessie felt a flicker of something she hadn't felt in a very long time, a fragile, terrifying spark of hope. But in a town like Redemption Creek, she knew that hope was often just another thing waiting to be taken. Unseen from a ridge overlooking Jessie's small, struggling ranch, another man watched Alex Boone's departure. Silas Blackwood sat atop a magnificent black stallion, his tailored suit a stark contrast to the rugged landscape. He was handsome, with a charismatic smile that never quite reached his cold, calculating eyes. He had been buying up the arid parcels of land surrounding the creek for months, his offers too generous to refuse, his methods ruthlessly efficient. Jessie's plot was the last piece of his puzzle. He watched Alex's retreating form with a flicker of interest. A new player on the board. Blackwood took a silver cigar case from his pocket, his movements deliberate and smooth. He lit the cigar, the flare of the match illuminating a predatory glint in his eyes. He had offered the widow a safe way out, a chance to escape with her dignity. She had refused. Now he would have to be more persuasive. The land, after all, was the least of what he was after. He was here for a ghost, and it seemed the ghost had finally found something to care about. A slow, cruel smile spread across Silas Blackwood's face. This, he thought, was about to become much more interesting. The days that followed the robbery settled into a rhythm of quiet desperation. The flower from Alex Boone was a temporary reprieve, a dam holding back a flood that Jessie knew was inevitable. She worked the hard-packed earth of her small ranch from sunup to sundown, her hands raw, her muscles screaming in protest. The sun was a relentless tyrant, baking the soil into a cracked, barren mosaic. Her late husband, a man full of hope but short on luck, had believed in this land. He'd sworn water ran deep beneath it, that with enough toil it would bloom. Now his belief felt like another ghost, haunting the dry, whispering wind. Silas Blackwood did not wait long to make his next move. He arrived one afternoon, his polished boots undusted by the trail, as if the very earth dared not cling to him. He dismounted his stallion and approached Jessie, who was trying to repair a section of fence with brittle wire and sheer will. "Mrs. Shaw," he began, his voice as smooth as Riverstone. "A pleasure to see you looking well after that unfortunate business in town." Jessie straightened, wiping a bead of sweat from her brow with the back of her wrist. "Mr. Blackwood, I came to reiterate my offer," he said, his smile unwavering. "In fact, given the circumstances, I'm prepared to be even more generous. It's a dangerous world for a woman alone with her children. I'm merely offering you a safe way out." The words were polite, but the tone was laced with something else, a veiled threat that coiled in the air between them. "This land is my home, Mr. Blackwood. It's all my children have left of their father. We're not running." Blackwood's smile tightened almost imperceptibly at the edges. "A sentimental notion, but sentiment doesn't fill bellies or keep wolves from the door." He gestured vaguely toward the horizon. "I trust you'll reconsider. My offer won't stand forever." He left as gracefully as he arrived, leaving Jessie with a cold knot of dread in her stomach. His warning about wolves felt chillingly specific. 2 days later, she understood why. The small creek that trickled along the edge of her property, the lifeblood for her meager vegetable garden and the few chickens she kept, had dwindled to a muddy crawl. She followed it upstream and found the cause a crudely built dam of rocks and logs, diverting the flow of water toward Blackwood's vast neighboring territory. It wasn't an act of nature. It was a declaration of war. Her heart pounded with a furious, helpless anger. She spent the better part of the day trying to dismantle the dam, her hands bleeding from pulling at the heavy wedged rocks. It was no use. It was the work of several men built to stand. That evening, as she hauled buckets of water from the nearly dry well, the futility of her situation settled upon her like a shroud. The next morning, Alex Boone appeared at her fence line. He carried a heavy shovel over his shoulder, his expression grim. He didn't ask what was wrong. He had seen the dying creek bed from his small cabin higher in the hills. "Trouble with the water?" he asked, though it wasn't a question. Jessie nodded, her throat too tight for words. "I'll fix it," he said simply. It was not a promise, but a statement of fact. He worked all day under the blistering sun, his movements powerful and efficient. He didn't dismantle Blackwood's dam. He dug a new channel deeper and more direct, redirecting what little water remained back onto Jessie's land. It was back-breaking labor, but he worked with a relentless, steady rhythm, as if he were at war with the earth itself. Jessie brought him water, and they exchanged few words, but a powerful, unspoken understanding grew between them. He was a man who did not speak of protection. He simply provided it. Late in the afternoon, 2 of Blackwood's hired hands rode up. They were large, brutish men with cruel eyes and guns strapped to their hips. They reined in their horses, looking down at Alex with undisguised contempt. "That water belongs to Mr. Blackwood," the first one growled. "You're on the wrong side of the fence, stranger." Alex slowly straightened, leaning on his shovel. He wasn't as large as the two men, but he possessed a density, a rootedness to the ground that made him seem immovable. His gray eyes were flat and cold. "This water runs where it's always run," he said, his voice low and even. "Now get off this lady's property." The second man laughed a harsh, ugly sound. "Or what you gonna hit us with that shovel?" He started to dismount, his hand moving toward his pistol. Alex didn't flinch. "I'd advise against that," he said, his tone dropping to something harder, something that held the promise of swift and terrible violence. It was in the set of his jaw, the sudden tension in his shoulders. It was the look of a man who knew exactly how to end a fight before it began. The hired hand hesitated, his hand hovering over his gun. He looked into Alex's eyes and saw something there that gave him pause, a chilling certainty that he was not an opponent to be trifled with. After a long, tense moment, the first man grunted, "Let's go. Blackwood can handle this himself." They wheeled their horses around and galloped away, leaving a cloud of dust and impotent threats in their wake. Jessie let out a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. She looked at Alex, who had already turned back to his work, as if the confrontation had been a minor distraction. In that moment, she saw more than just a kind stranger. She saw a protector, a bulwark against the forces that sought to crush her. But she also saw the danger he invited. By helping her, he had painted a target on his own back. As the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the land, the small trench was complete. A trickle of water, brown and muddy, but precious as gold, began to flow toward her parched garden. Alex washed his hands in the stream, the first water to grace her land in days. "He won't stop," Jessie said softly, watching the hired men disappear in the distance. "Neither will I," Alex replied, his gaze meeting hers. It was a vow as solemn and binding as any spoken in a church. That night, a deeper connection began to form between them, one forged in shared struggle and mutual respect. He stayed for dinner, a simple meal of beans and cornbread, and for the first time, he spoke of himself. He didn't offer details, but he spoke of a past he was trying to outrun, a quiet life he was trying to build. He had a wife once, he said, lost to fever 2 winters past. The words were spare, but they carried a universe of grief. Jessie, in turn, spoke of her husband, of his dreams for this land, of her own fierce determination to see them through. The children, sensing the shift in the atmosphere, gravitated toward Alex. Sammy, a quiet and observant boy of 6, sat near him, watching his every move with wide-eyed admiration. Ella, though still shy, asked him questions about the mountains. And little Molly, only 3, toddled over and climbed into his lap, falling asleep against his broad chest. Alex looked down at the child, a look of profound, heart-wrenching sorrow on his face, as if holding her was both a comfort and a pain. Jessie watched them, her heart aching. For the first time since her husband's death, the small cabin felt less empty. It felt like a home. But the shadow of Silas Blackwood loomed over them, and she knew their fragile peace was as precarious as the trickle of water in the newly dug trench. The battle for the land and for their future had just begun. The fragile peace settled over the Shawl Ranch like a morning mist, beautiful, but destined to burn away. Alex became a quiet fixture in their lives. He never overstayed his welcome, yet he always seemed to be there when he was needed most. He helped Jessie mend the barn roof, his hammer strikes echoing in the clear morning air. He taught Ella how to track rabbits, his voice patient and low. He even carved a small wooden horse for Sammy, who carried it everywhere, a treasured talisman from his new hero. The connection between Jessie and Alex deepened in the quiet spaces between chores and conversations. It was in the way he looked at her, when he thought she wasn't watching, a mixture of admiration and a deep, abiding sadness. It was in the way she found herself listening for the sound of his horse, her heart giving a small, traitorous leap when he appeared over the rise. They were two solitary souls circling each other, cautiously, both too wounded by the past to rush toward a future. Blackwood, however, was not a patient man. His campaign of attrition continued each act, a subtle turn of the screw. One morning, Jessie awoke to find the fence to her chicken coop cut the scattered feathers, a grim testament to a visit from a coyote. Another day, a small fire started in the dry brush near the edge of her property, forcing her and Alex to spend hours beating it out with wet sacks before it could reach the barn. Each incident was plausibly deniable, an act of nature or bad luck. But Jessie knew better. It was Blackwood's way of reminding her that he was always watching, that her world could unravel at any moment. The town of Redemption Creek remained a silent observer. The townsfolk had seen Blackwood's methods before. They knew he was squeezing the widow out, but fear and self-preservation kept their mouths shut. Alex's presence on her ranch, however, did not go unnoticed. Whispers followed Jessie when she went to the mercantile for supplies. Boone's taken up with the widow, they'd mutter behind their hands. Wonder what he sees in her. The scorn was a constant low-grade fever, but with Alex by her side, it felt less potent. The past, however, was a debt that always came due. One night, a violent thunderstorm rolled across the plains and the sky cracking open with furious light. Alex had stayed late to help secure a loose shutter on the barn, and the storm trapped him there. They sat in the cabin, the children asleep, with the only sounds the drumming of rain and the crackle of the fire. The thunder rattled the windows, and Alex flinched, his body going rigid. Jessie saw the haunted look in his eyes at the way his hand instinctively clenched into a fist. Later that night, long after the storm had passed, she was awoken by a cry from the barn where Alex had offered to sleep. It was a strangled, desperate sound, a name torn from a nightmare. She found him sitting up in the hay, his face pale in the moonlight, his body drenched in a cold sweat. "Alex," she whispered. "Are you all right?" He looked at her, his eyes unfocused, still trapped in the landscape of his dream. "The badge," he muttered. It was a clean shoot. But the boy's eyes. He shook his head, clearing the fog of sleep. He saw her standing there, concern etched on her face, and a mask of composure fell back into place. "Just a bad dream, Jessie. Go on back to bed." But the words lingered in her mind. Asterisk badge clean, shoot the boy's eyes, asterisk. It was a glimpse into the past he kept so carefully guarded. The next day, while mending a tear in his heavy duster, her fingers brushed against something hard and flat, sewn into the lining. Her curiosity overriding her better judgment, she carefully picked at the stitches. Inside was a small oilskin pouch. She unfolded it to reveal a tarnished silver star, the badge of a U.S. Marshal. The sight of it sent a shiver down her spine. The quiet, gentle man who had saved her daughter and fixed her fences was a lawman. Or had been. Why would he hide it? The mystery of Alex Boone deepened, becoming as vast and unsettling as the plains at midnight. Meanwhile, Blackwood was growing more brazen. He began asking Jessie questions that seemed innocuous at first, but were layered with a strange intensity. "Your husband, Mr. Shaw," he'd said one day, catching her on her way out of town. "A quiet man, I hear. Never one to stray far from his land. Did he ever mention finding anything unusual out here? An old chest, perhaps? Anything left behind by travelers?" "My husband was a farmer, Mr. Blackwood. He was more concerned with what came out of the ground than what might be buried in it." Jessie had replied coolly, though the question unsettled her. The pieces were beginning to connect in a way she didn't understand. Alex's nightmare, the hidden badge, Blackwood's strange obsession with her land. Sheriff Thorne inadvertently provided another piece, when he stopped by to check on her. Funny thing, the sheriff mused, stroking his mustache. Silas Blackwood rode into town less than a week after Alex Boone did. For a man who claims to have no connection to him, it's a strange coincidence. The feeling of being caught in the middle of something far larger than a land dispute grew stronger every day. Jesse's ranch was not just a piece of property. It was a stage, and a dark, forgotten drama was about to be played out upon it. She looked at the hidden marshal's badge in her hand, and the weight of it feeling heavier than simple metal. It was the key to a story, she was sure of it, a story that held the power to either save them or destroy them all. The dam of pretense finally broke on a blistering afternoon. Blackwood, tired of his games of subtle intimidation, decided it was time to reveal his hand. He rode out to Jesse's ranch, but this time he wasn't looking for her. He found Alex by the creek, reinforcing the channel they had dug. Blackwood dismounted his movements, radiating a coiled, predatory energy. "Boone," he said, the name sounding like an accusation. "We need to talk." Alex straightened slowly, his hand resting on the handle of his shovel. "I've got nothing to say to you, Blackwood." "Oh, I think you do," Blackwood said, a chilling smile playing on his lips. "You see, you and I have some history, though you wouldn't know it. You knew me by a different name back then. You knew my brother." He paused, letting the words hang in the hot, still air. "His name was Daniel Kane, a boy of 19. Does that name ring any bells? Asterisk, Marshall asterisk." The color drained from Alex's face. The shovel slipped from his grasp, thudding softly into the dirt. The carefully constructed walls he had built around his past crumbled in an instant. The nightmare, the hidden badge, the haunted look in his eyes, it all snapped into focus. Daniel Kane. Alex breathed the name a ghost on his tongue. "He drew on me. It was a lawful pursuit." Lawful. Blackwood laughed, a harsh, grating sound that held no humor. "You shot him in the back as he was trying to surrender. You, a decorated U.S. Marshal, executed my brother in the dust of some forgotten town. My name, by the way, is Silas Kane. Blackwood is just a convenience." The revelation hit Alex like a physical blow. This wasn't about land. It had never been about land. This was about revenge. "That's a lie," Alex said, his voice a low growl. "There was a witness. He signed a report. A witness who was paid handsomely by my brother's so-called partners to disappear." Silas sneered. "But that's not the point. The point is, you took the only family I had. And for 5 years, I have hunted you. I learned you'd retired, disappeared. And then I heard a man matching your description had settled here in this godforsaken corner of the world, trying to play farmer. So I came. And I watched. And I saw you find a new life. A new family." His cold eyes flickered toward Jesse's cabin. "And I decided that simply killing you would be too merciful. I'm going to do to you what you did to me. I'm going to take everything you love, piece by piece. I'm going to leave you with nothing but the ghosts of what might have been." He then delivered the final devastating blow. "Your new life is built on a foundation of San Boone. Because on this very land, there is a lockbox. Your official report is in it, yes. But so is a signed, sworn statement from another witness, a local preacher who saw the whole thing. A statement that says you murdered my brother in cold blood. Jesse's husband found it years ago, tucked it away somewhere safe. He was an honest man. He probably didn't know what to do with it. I've been trying to get my hands on it to see you hang. All I wanted was that box. But now destroying you emotionally seems so much more satisfying." The world tilted on its axis. Jessie and her children weren't just bystanders. They were the weapon Silas intended to use against Alex. Their home wasn't a home. It was the hiding place for the evidence that could either condemn or exonerate the man she was beginning to love. Silas mounted his horse, his face a mask of triumphant hatred. She'll find it eventually. And when she reads it, when she sees the monster you truly are, she will cast you out. And I will be there to pick up the pieces. Enjoy your borrowed time, Marshal. He spurred his horse and galloped away, leaving Alex standing alone by the creek, a man utterly undone. The quiet life he had so desperately sought was a fantasy. The past had not just caught up with him. It had laid a trap, and he had walked directly into it, bringing the only people he had allowed himself to care for in years with him. The change in Alex was immediate and stark. The quiet warmth that had begun to radiate from him vanished, replaced by a glacial distance. He became a ghost at the edges of their lives again. His eyes haunted his words, clipped and infrequent. He stopped sharing meals in the cabin, instead taking his plate to the barn. He no longer sought out Jessie's company, and when she tried to speak to him, his answers were evasive and cold. "Trouble finds men like me," he told her one evening, his back to her as he stared out at the darkening plains. "Best you and the children stay clear." The rejection was a physical ache in Jessie's chest. She didn't understand. One moment they were on the verge of something new and hopeful. The next, he had slammed a door between them, leaving her alone in the cold. Silas Blackwood, ever the opportunist, used the growing rift to his advantage. He approached Jessie in town, his expression one of deep, feigned concern. "Mrs. Shaw," he said, his voice gentle, "I hope you'll forgive my forwardness, but I am worried for you. A man like Boone, men like that carry darkness with them. You never know what they're running from or what might be running after them. Your children are not safe." His words, meant to poison her against Alex, had the opposite effect. They resonated with the mystery she was already struggling to unravel, the nightmare, the hidden badge, Alex's sudden withdrawal. It was all connected. Blackwood's oddly specific questions about a hidden box suddenly clicked into place. That night, driven by a desperate need for the truth, Jessie tore her late husband's workshop apart. She searched through old crates, dusty shelves, and forgotten corners. Finally tucked away in the false bottom of an old tool chest, her fingers brushed against cold metal. It was a small, heavy lockbox, rusted at the hinges. Her husband, a man who kept no secrets, had clearly hidden this for a reason. With trembling hands, she pried it open with the end of a crowbar. Inside, nestled on a bed of yellowed cotton, were 2 sets of documents. The first was a U.S. Marshal's report detailing the pursuit and fatal shooting of an outlaw named Daniel Kane. It was signed by Alex Boone. The second document was a sworn affidavit. It was signed by a man of the cloth, a Reverend Michael Abernathy, the uncle of the banker in Redemption Creek, from a town 200 miles away. His statement was clear, concise, and utterly damning. It described how Marshal Boone had cornered the young outlaw, who had thrown down his weapon and raised his hands in surrender, only for the marshal to shoot him down without mercy. Jessie sank to the floor, the papers trembling in her hand. The world seemed to drop out from beneath her. Here it was in black and white, the proof that the quiet, protective man her children had come to adore, the man she had allowed into her heart, was a cold-blooded killer. The 2 versions of Alex Boone warred in her mind, the hero who had shielded her daughter with his own body, and the executioner described in these pages. Which one was real? And what was she supposed to do now? Her choice would determine not only her own future, but the fate of the man who had inexplicably become the center of her world. The air in the cabin crackled with an unspoken tension. Jessie hid the lockbox, the weight of its contents, a stone in her heart. Every time she looked at Alex, she saw 2 men, the gentle protector and the ruthless killer from the report. Her uncertainty was a chasm between them, and Silas Blackwood's shadow loomed over it all. He struck at dusk when the world was painted in shades of gray and purple. Jessie was inside preparing a meager supper, while the children played their last game of the day near the barn. Sammy, chasing a grasshopper, wandered farther than he should have, his small form disappearing behind the weathered structure. A moment later, a sickeningly familiar voice called out smooth and deceptively calm, "Mrs. Shaw." Jessie's blood ran cold. She rushed to the door and saw Silas Blackwood on his stallion, an unholy grin on his face. In front of him, held securely in the saddle, was her son. Sammy's eyes were wide with terror, a dirty rag stuffed in his mouth to keep him from crying out. "He's a fine boy," Blackwood said conversationally, as if discussing the weather. "It would be a shame if anything happened to him. The lockbox, Mrs. Shaw. For your son. Meet me at the abandoned silver mine north of here. Come alone, and be quick. A sandstorm is brewing, and I'd hate for the boy to get caught in it." Before she could scream, before she could plead, he wheeled the horse around and galloped into the twilight, disappearing into the dust. Panic, raw and absolute, seized Jessie. She screamed Alex's name, her voice tearing through the quiet evening. He emerged from the barn, his face a grim mask. He saw her expression, saw the empty space where Sammy should have been, and he knew. Without a word, Jessie ran back into the cabin and returned with the lockbox, thrusting it into his hands. "He has Sammy," she choked out, tears streaming down her face. "The mine. He wants this for Sammy." Alex opened the box, his eyes scanning the damning affidavit. A muscle worked in his jaw. He looked at Jessie, his stormy gray eyes filled with a pain that mirrored her own. "Jessie, you have to believe me. That preacher, he was Daniel's uncle. He lied. I cornered Daniel, yes. He threw down his gun, but it was a trick. He had a derringer hidden in his boot. He went for it. I had no choice." He finally confessed the whole truth, his voice rough with remembered grief. "I left the marshals because of that day. Not because of guilt, but because I was tired of the killing. Tired of looking into boys' eyes as the life went out of them. I just wanted peace." Jessie looked into his face, into the depths of his tormented eyes. In that moment, all doubt vanished. This was the man she knew, the man who had saved her daughter, the man who had held her sleeping child with such gentle reverence. The paper in the box was just words. The man before her was the truth. "I believe you," she said, her voice firm. "Now let's go get our son." The journey to the abandoned silver mine was a race against the approaching storm. The wind was rising, whipping sand and dust into the air, stinging their skin and obscuring the trail. The sky was a bruised, angry purple. They rode as one Jessie's smaller mare, struggling to keep pace with Alex's powerful gelding. The mine entrance was a gaping maw in the side of a rocky hill, timbers groaning under the strain of the wind. A single lantern cast a sickly yellow glow from within. Alex dismounted, pulling his rifle from its scabbard. "Stay here," he commanded. "When I go in, ride for Sheriff Thorne. Tell him everything." "No," Jessie said, swinging down from her horse. "Sammy is my son. I'm not leaving." Alex saw the unyielding resolve in her eyes and knew it was useless to argue. He gave her a small pistol he kept tucked in his saddlebag. "Stay behind me, no matter what." Inside the mine shaft was a labyrinth of darkness and eerie silence, broken by the howl of the wind funneling through the tunnels. The lantern light flickered, casting long, dancing shadows. Blackwood's voice echoed from the depths. "Boone, I knew you couldn't resist. Leave the box and the woman, and you can have the boy." "Let the boy go first, Silas," Alex shouted back, his voice swallowed by the cavernous space. He pushed Jessie into a side tunnel, whispering his plan. He knew these mines. He would use the echoes, the darkness, his skills as a tracker. This would not be a gunfight. It would be a hunt. He crept forward, a shadow among shadows, while Jessie held her position, her heart hammering against her ribs. The tension stretched to a breaking point. Blackwood's pocket watch could be heard ticking in a pocket of silence, each click an eternity. Alex used his knowledge of the terrain, kicking a loose pile of rocks down a separate shaft to create a diversion. As Blackwood's men moved toward the sound, Alex slipped past them deeper into the mine. He found them in a large central chamber. Sammy was tied to a support beam, his small face pale with fear. Blackwood stood beside him, a pistol aimed at the boy's head. "You were always predictable," Marshal Blackwood sneered. It was then that Jessie made her move. Following Alex's earlier instructions, she used the lantern she'd brought, holding it high and then smashing it against a rock wall near another entrance. The oil ignited with a whoosh, creating a wall of smoke and confusing light, silhouetting Blackwood and his men. The diversion was all Alex needed. He fired not to kill, but to disarm. His shots were precise, striking the guns from the hands of Blackwood's two thugs. He launched himself at Blackwood, a silent, avenging force. The two men crashed to the ground, a desperate, brutal struggle in the flickering, smoke-filled light. As they fought, a wounded and enraged Blackwood gasped out the final tragic twist of his story. He was going to betray them. He screamed, his face contorted with fury. "My brother." His own gang was going to kill him for the loot. "That witness you chased off," he told me years later. Daniel was no angel. He was just as rotten as the rest of them. The revelation hung in the air, a testament to a revenge built on a flawed, romanticized memory. His entire crusade was for a brother who was never the loyal victim he imagined. The fight ended as Alex slammed Blackwood's head against the rock floor, knocking him unconscious. He chose justice over vengeance, proving to himself and to Jessie that the man he used to be was truly gone. He cut Sammy free, sweeping the crying boy into his arms. As they emerged from the mine, blinking against the raging sandstorm, they were met by the reassuring sight of Sheriff Thorne and a posse of armed townsmen, their lanterns cutting through the dusty gloom. Jessie had done as Alex asked, signaling them with a prearranged series of gunshots once the fight began. The showdown was over. The sandstorm passed as quickly as it had arrived, leaving the world washed clean. Back in Redemption Creek, a sense of quiet order returned. Sheriff Thorne, armed with the contents of the lockbox and the testimony of Blackwood's captured men, had everything he needed. Silas Blackwood, wounded and defeated, was locked away, his reign of tyranny over. The truth spread through the town like a slow-moving current. They learned of Blackwood's vendetta, of Jessie's quiet defiance, and of Alex's heroic past and his desperate attempt to escape it. The whispers of scorn that had once followed Jessie were replaced by murmurs of respect. The suspicion that had surrounded Alex transformed into admiration. They were no longer outcasts. They were survivors. They were part of the town's story now. A few days later, Alex and Jessie sat on the porch of her small cabin, watching the children play in the yard. The oppressive heat had broken, and a gentle breeze rustled the leaves of the lone cottonwood tree. For the first time, there were no secrets between them. He had laid bare his past, the violence and the sorrow, and she had listened, her hand resting over his. "That was the man you were," she said softly, her voice full of a grace he felt he didn't deserve. "This is the man you are." He looked at her, at the strength and compassion in her eyes, and felt a profound sense of peace settle over him, a feeling he had long thought was lost to him forever. He was no longer running. He was home. Months passed. The harshness of summer gave way to a gentle golden autumn. With Blackwood gone and the water flowing freely, the small ranch began to thrive under their combined efforts. The vegetable garden yielded a modest but proud harvest. The barn stood strong, its roof no longer leaking. The laughter of the children was a constant, joyful sound that filled the once silent spaces. One crisp fall evening, Jessie brought out a small cedar keepsake box. She held it in her lap as she sat beside Alex on the porch swing. Without a word, she slipped the plain gold wedding ring from her late husband off the chain around her neck where she had kept it. She held it for a moment, a silent farewell to a life that was gone, and placed it gently in the box. Then she looked at Alex. He understood. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small, worn silver locket. He opened it, revealing a faded miniature portrait of a young woman with kind eyes, his late wife. He looked at it for a long time before closing it with a soft click and placing it in the box beside the ring. Jessie closed the lid. "Our pasts don't need to be forgotten," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "They can live here together while we build a future." It was a vow more powerful than any spoken in a church, a quiet testament to their shared journey of healing and hope. The following week, Sheriff Thorne rode out to the ranch. He wasn't there on official business. He dismounted and handed Jessie a rolled-up scroll tied with a ribbon. The town council took a vote. He said, a rare smile crinkling the corners of his tired eyes. "Seems they felt Redemption Creek owed you and Mr. Boone a debt of gratitude. For getting rid of Blackwood, and for reminding folks what it means to stand your ground." Jessie unrolled the scroll. It was the deed to her land. Across the bottom in bold ink were the words, "Paid in full." The mortgage, the debts, the weight that had threatened to crush her for so long, all of it was gone. It was a gift from the community, a final, undeniable sign that they were accepted, that they belonged. Tears welled in Jessie's eyes as she looked from the deed to Alex, who stood beside her, his arm resting protectively around her shoulders. The children ran to join them, and their small hands clutching at their legs, a complete and unbroken circle. Together, they stood on the porch of their home, looking out at the land that was now truly theirs, a future stretching before them under a wide, hopeful sky.